Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us on this inaugural event.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
this is beautiful.
How are you all feeling tonight? Looking good. Very
I feel like we're in
attractive.
like a speakeasy uptown or something. There's like tables.
It's a meditation speakeasy.
I love
We're
it. Even better.
So as Dawn mentioned, one of the goals of the series is to both be in conversation with amazing folks who are really using spiritual practices and other contemplative practices to fuel their transformative work in the world, and also to offer tools that all of us can use to do our work. And so in that spirit, we'll start with a little bit of meditation, if that's cool.
Yes.
It's nice to begin the talk. So for this, we're hoping that this is totally accessible, whether you've been practicing for a long time or whether this is your first time ever meditating. That's all. And I'll just ask that you, if you have something in your hands, put it to the side so that your hands can really relax. Your feet, if they can rest on the floor in some way, that can be great. And if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes or just soften them to the space in front of you. And taking a big breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And we'll do one more like that, breathing in and breathing out. And then starting to let your breath come and go through your nose naturally, and just tune in with the how pleasant it is just to sit. For some of us who might have been running around all day. So allowing your body to settle in the place where you are right now. And then allowing your mind and your heart to catch up with your body. And we'll just take the attitude that you can't do this wrong. That mindfulness, awareness is a natural quality of heart and mind that all human beings have. And because we're talking about birth, and Dawn mentioned the earth, I thought we could bring in the earth element into this meditation. And so if you could bring your awareness to the earth element of your body, which is your bones. Feeling the density of the bones, the hardness of them, the way they give structure to the body. And then starting to surrender the weight of your bones towards the earth itself, which is somewhere under this floor. So we have the earth element of our bodies resting on the big earth body, which is connecting all of us. And of course, every once in a while, the mind might notice a thought that it's having or a sound in the room, and that's fine. Just when you can, bring your attention back to the sense of this earth body resting on the big earth body. Noticing too that your body is naturally breathing. It's doing it all on its own. starting to pay attention to what it feels like to breathe. Perhaps having a sense of appreciation for this breath that's been with you all your life. And then before we start to close the practice, having settled the body into the earth a little bit, having paid attention to the breath and appreciated it a little bit, just a moment to bring to mind someone who for you embodies the power of creativity. Could be through what they make or how they are in the world. Seeing if you can picture them, getting a sense of what it might be like to be with them at this moment, kind of bringing that spirit into the room. And then if you'd like, keeping the felt sense or the image of this person in your mind as you start to take another couple deep breaths, really feeling the body settling into your seat. And then when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes, lift your gaze, look around the room. Thank you for taking that pause. And actually, would you mind just turning to a person close to you and sharing who showed up for you, if you would?
My son.
Your son?
Yeah. First it was my mom, really freaked out.
It was
For you.
my paternal grandmother.
See, it's interesting. I have my son and then my grandmother, but she's passed. And I couldn't think of her doing anything except for just her. And then I thought of my son, and I just thought of him making music. But yeah, I had a similar thing with the grandmother.
She was always like, she knew how to make things, see things, make things live. Mm-hmm. Okay, so wrapping up your last thought or two. Thanks for warming up the room in that way. Mm-hmm. And we'll have a little bit of time. Also, sorry if you couldn't hear me during the meditation. Apparently my mic fell into my lap. These beads got a little. Yeah, we'll have a little time for our audience sharing at the end, and love to hear about who showed up for you. But I want to welcome you again.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I thought we could maybe start our conversation by just, if you wouldn't mind sharing about what a doula is.
Yes. Well, before, I would just like to thank the Rubin Museum, Dawn, for the beautiful intro and holding space for us. Thank you so much, Kate, for just the vision and the opportunity to be here and to have a conversation like this in a space like this as well. So thank you for that. And she didn't mention that she just got off a plane from South Africa yesterday or today? Yesterday. So whatever, it's like in the future where she was. And came straight here and has been really communicative in making sure that everyone was prepared for this moment. And so the culmination of this moment is so beautiful. So thank you for all the work that you did while you were, supposed to be probably resting mostly and meditating, but she also helped us a lot with this. So I want to thank you. So a doula, and there's some doulas in here, so make sure you meet them. I see some of them that have trained with us at Mama Glow. Yeah, hi. So a doula is a care provider that provides non-clinical support for mothers and families, primarily through the childbearing period. So during the early stages of pregnancy, sometimes people will say, oh my God, I'm so excited. They need someone to help navigate the process. And I think of it like, holding someone's hand as they cross a river, and that you kind of figure out a terrain and you've done it enough that oh, here's a slippery spot. Okay, watch your step here, and you know when to hold tight and when to be loose. But really, it's that you're being guided by the energy of the mother and really the soul of the baby. And so, the work is really about, it's never about us, right? It's really about the families that we support and being a witness. And so that support looks like physical support, so making sure a person feels comfortable as much as possible during the experience of labor and childbirth. Advocacy, which is making sure that people feel seen and heard in their vision for what the birth could be, and also in terms of what their rights are. Physical support, advocacy, mental, emotional, spiritual support, like all of those are in like a bucket where you're kind of like a therapist halfway and you're like a sister, you're like a best friend. And then there's also partner support where you help to educate a partner if there's one present so that they can participate at their level of comfort in the process. And I would also say that there's also a kind of, you serve as almost like a glue, right? To help create this container that's really cohesive for the people that are part of this experience. And so I think about it as a responsibility to preserve the memory of this experience for this person, right? I want them to have a really fond memory, whatever the outcome. So it's really about holding space. One of my clients calls it like a producer for your birth. So for anybody who does production, there's some things that people don't know about that happened, right? And this is like, everything's cool, right? So sometimes that means like walking into a space and being like, oof, somebody was crying in here, right? And clearing energy, or making sure that I meet with practitioners and that they feel good. And because it's a birthday, right? Like I want people to be interacting with the clients in a way where the clients feel supported, but also that they feel honored in this process. It's not a procedure, right? It's a transformation. It's a pathway to empowerment. It's a portal of life, right? And that we go through. And so it's a life transition. So I see it as, as many times as I've gone, whether it's a hospital, I've done them, at home on purpose, at home not on purpose, in taxis. Barely, total movie.
In taxi?
Yeah, Uber actually at the time. Uber at the time, Uber X or whatever. So there was some space. It was not intentional. We were right there though, so it was close. But this is, this is what it is. It's a flexibility, and I think that when we talk about mindfulness, what we look to achieve is like applicability, right, in our consciousness and in our the way that we approach the world. It's not just about like, here's how I'm gonna show up, right? It's like we show up and then we see like, what does the moment call for, right? What do I need now? What does this person need of me in this moment? How do I serve all people involved? And so it's that approach, which I think is so applicable to every aspect of our lives. If we think about how we move through our workspaces, how we relate to family members, friends, lovers, loved ones, I think it's a way that, at every life transition that we enter through, whether that's a job change or whether that's a divorce, or I think there's so many spaces that we really need hand-holding And a doula is so prepared for that, right? And so on the other side of that, there would be, support in the postpartum period as well, right? So we talk about birth doulas primarily, but there's a postpartum doula for the mother who is born, right, into motherhood. So she has someone who just addresses really her needs for recovery and also for ascending into this new version of herself where she sheds an ego and becomes someone new, right? And so it's like you molt, your soul molts like a snake, right? And then this new version of yourself emerges, and you're so vulnerable, right? Wow. Imagine when a snake sheds at night, it's the most vulnerable it ever will be, right? And at that point, you need to be like swaddled with love and support, just like a baby, right? They have basic human needs, and a mother has basic human needs that have to also be met. And our current cultural structure doesn't support it, right? And a lot of our medical model doesn't support it. But so that's what I would say. And then the other side of that, we also have, there's death doulas who support people transitioning into the afterlife. We also have doulas who support people through loss. So sometimes people are terminating a pregnancy. Sometimes it's a baby that's very much wanted, but it's not possible. And sometimes it's out of ambivalence, and it's everybody's choice whenever the choice is made. And they also need support, right? So along the entire continuum, there's always women supporting women, right? At every facet of our lives. And I think that it's so beautiful now that there's so much conversation about it. So I'm really excited that people are feeling called and feeling like, wait a minute, this is something that was always in me, and now I'm seeing that this is an actual career, so I can go do that thing that I've been feeling. So I love that that's really sparking a larger movement, that there's so many more doulas, and that's obviously creating more access for people who need them most.
Totally, yeah. Well, I love that you're a part of training people to do that work. And when you were talking about the way that doulas show up and look at what's happening and decide what's needed, and there's this adaptability and flexibility, a lot of that language really reminded me of what one of my teachers, Arwana Hayashi, says. She says that not knowing is the ground of creativity. Yeah. And what you talked about right there just made me think like, oh wow, it's really artistry. Do you see it that way? I know you have I read that you have a background in visual arts, that you went to school for visual arts and environmental studies.
I did.
Is that, do you consider doulaing your art practice now? What's your creative practice?
I see, well, yes and no. I think more it's like the experience of coming together through ritual and making the information, because there's a lot of information that people have to learn, and those of you in the audience who have done the training know it's a lot of information. So instead of it being like a classroom, we create like this immersive experience that, for me, that's my act of creativity, is like holding this space and creating this dynamic where everyone has the ability to like surrender and ascend. And that's a dynamic of safety, so that each woman has her own experience, and I just provide a space for energy transmission, and I just kind of facilitate. And for me, that's the art more.
It's like space holding, kind of.
Because the birth itself, like whoever it is, like that's their dance, and I'm just there, like kind of gently guiding, right? And so I think it's that, and then I think it's what you bring to it that's personal for you, right? Like whatever your sauce is. When I went to Columbia, and I was too social to be a scientist, apparently, because I was like in the labs, and I would bring people over, and they were like, "You can't do this." And so then when I went to the art, the art rooms, they would be open until like 3 a.m, and then we would, stay up late and do all of our projects that were like, you would supposed to spend like a month. I would do them in like compressed 2 days or whatever, right? Like college kids. So I would do that, but I had this well that was like constantly overflowing of creative energy. So I balanced kind of like what I understood and what I really loved about the natural sciences. And I grew up in California. Anybody California? Anybody? Yes!
Oakland.
You made it.
Yes. Okay. Oakland. Okay. So I grew up in Oakland, and I studied with this master herbalist when I was a kid, and I, in that journey, learned so much about plant systems and botany, and through that, I think, that connected me with nature, but also the art of nature. So I think for me, it's always this. It's not separate. Like I see, when I look at plants, I'm like, oh my God, like we don't even deserve what I see. When I see like the cherry blossoms on the way here, I'm like, we don't even deserve it. We don't deserve this weather too, by the way, it's freezing. But we don't even deserve the beauty of the cherry blossoms. And I just feel like how do I even get to see this, right? So I think for me, it's just like if you can stay reveling in beauty and in the divine as it unfolds constantly, which is birth, which is evolution, that I think can keep you tapped into creative power. And I think creative vibration is happening always around us all the time. And so whether that's attending a birth, whether that is drawing, whatever it is, for me, writing comes up a lot, but I just use whatever comes through. But when it comes to the education, I think that's where I put my creative juices in, so that the experience is one where the women won't forget it. Just like you don't ever forget how your baby was born, right, and how you were born into parenthood. I want to make sure that the doulas who are initiated don't forget that moment of initiation and those women that they were with.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that yes, exhale. One of the,
Thank you.
One of the things that I read in your online publication, Mamazine, that inspired me to really want to talk to you was a suggestion. It was just like a little snippet of a blog post that was about creating a business. It was kind of calling to entrepreneurs, and it said, have you considered working with a vision doula? Which was like an incredible concept for me. I was like, oh my gosh, I've needed that, at times, or even.
Well, you do that with people though, Kate, kinda.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I did it with someone this afternoon on the text message, just like little, kind of guiding people into. Well, it's mostly like friends that call when they get stuck.
Right.
So I think it's a natural thing, and it's also to name it is something, right? To say like
to call it,
to call it, and to actually ask for it from someone else. And so I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that, like what it means to. Well, two things. One, this process of. Showing up for each other in the creative process, but also I guess what struck me and touched me about that, like naming that role, is that so often, at least what I learned about creativity and making something new, is that you go off into some room and you work on it by yourself and you don't show it to anyone, and you come out and it's like fully formed, and it's like, here, my Don Quixote, right?
The legend.
And I have been working on a book, Baby, which is going to be done very soon. But at one point, a friend of mine took me aside and she was like, Kate, no one does this on their own. She was like, literally no one. Any of the authors that you love, they've had editors, they've had friends read, they've, cried, on someone's shoulder. And so I think part of what strikes me as radical too about a vision doula is the idea that you're actually letting someone else into your creative process, and you're allowing them to see you in the messiness of it, and the imperfection, and
in the birth,
Is that it?
That's it. And I think what's also really interesting is if we think about like our culture where like the pace is accelerated, right? Like we live really fast, like, you're here, but then you're gonna check your phone, there's gonna be 20 messages unread, and it's gonna be a whole thing, and your heart palpitates, and you're like, oh my God, to get back to people. Like there's just this sense of urgency, but also acceleration, right? Like we're moving much faster, we live much faster. And so when we think about things that move through the process of cycling, when we think about anything that's connected to, first of all, hard work, but also process, it takes time, right? And anything that we're giving rise to that's really important usually takes a lot more time and attention and care, but can be also painful, right? Which means that you have to give up something, or you have to give up something to get the next thing, right? So whether that's like sacrificing time, like to be with friends or whatever, so that you could stay doing this, missing concert, whatever is happening, because you're focused on this thing, right? I think that because there's so much focus on productivity and the outcome, and not enough focus on like process, people get really stuck on like launching and like the product and like what we see and like the outcome. And so it's like, if it's like Instagram and Valencia filter, perfect, right? Is like, whoa, look at them, right? Or like, wow, how did they get there in like overnight, right? When it's really like, whoa, it took, 10 years to get there overnight, right? Or we think about bamboo, and you could just be watering it for years and years and years, and then one day, like, here it comes above ground, but then it's like 10 feet tall in like, 4.5 months. And you're like, whoa, how did that happen? But you went every day and tended. And so I think people forget that like process is what makes perfect, right? And perfect not through like, like perfection through this lens that's more about ego, but perfection in the iteration of the form that it's meant to be, right? Like, each apple is different, but they're all perfect, right? And so when we think about process in this way, like, what's my process? And how do I enter into this process in a way that really honors what it is that I'm setting out to do and is aligned with my intention? And who can join me in that journey? So what type of circle of support do I have, right? Like, what does that look like? And so in birth, people put together like a birth team, the people that are going to support in different ways. And so I think when you're giving rise to a new project or screenplay or book or ballet or whatever it will be, that it takes the same energy, right, to outline like who are going to be the people that I can confide, because there's lots of people you can tell things to, right? But there's also a lot of people that are wishing you things but not wishing you well, right? And so you might share the wrong thing with the wrong person, just like you might share news about something and then people start telling you unsolicited, if you're pregnant, by the way, like everybody has advice, right? Like you didn't even ask for it and you're on the train and someone's like, let me tell you something about pregnancy, right? But it's like everybody has advice, right? So when you're in process, if you have these people around, either a designated vision doula who helps you to hold the vision, who believes in something that cannot yet be seen, right? And helps you to cultivate that, then you have someone who's always holding your hand and who also sees the North Star even when it's dark and you can't see it, right? And so we have to have people who can see in the dark that are around us. Because when we think about darkness, and I know this is also something that I like to elucidate, a lot of what's sort of happened since I think probably like before the Dark Ages, but I think there was a whole thing about like, with Christianity around darkness and light and like, this concept of darkness being really bad. And so I think people generally think if they go through a period where they have to go underground or have to be in a cave or have to be like the Buddha and step away from the light for a second, this is a process where things are born because all things grow in the dark, right? And so you have to retreat, and sometimes it's alone, and then there's a moment where somebody comes in and stands in that space with you where you're crying or you're on your knees, or where you're at this peak point in the labor process and you feel like you can't do it, and someone sets in and gives these words that you needed, right, to keep you pushing forward. Or, you realize that you're not ever really alone, and even if nobody's there, you somehow summon up the force to keep going, right? And so it's through darkness that we are born into light, right? And the babies, as they descend through this pubitogenital triangle, right? It's an actual triangle, which we know triangles are sacred for sacred geometry. We know that the triangle is like this holy shape that the baby descends through from the pelvis and is born into light, right? But is cultivated in darkness. And so we know the same about, like, if we look around at nature too, like anything that's growing, right, was underground. And before it came to the surface, before we even saw leaves, there was still underground, like, root systems that were really, like, powerfully laid down, organic root systems, before anything comes above, right? And so everything's already mapped, right? And so I think it's like, if we can trust that darkness is really a powerful pathway for us to, and important portal for us to move through, so we can come to the other side, then we won't be as much afraid of starting that project, or we won't be much afraid of, you know, any perceived pain, because on the other side of the pain is glory. And in that pain, also, like, through the challenge, that's our journey, that's like our hero's journey, really, right? To feel at our edge, right? Like, as if, almost sometimes as if it challenges you in a way where sometimes you feel like you can't even imagine, you're like overtaken, right, sometimes? And it forces a surrender upon you, right? Like, sometimes, and I know it from my birth with my son, who's 15 now. He was actually born on 14th Street.
Wow.
Really close to here. I was like, how come I'm like feeling very familiar in this area? But this is something that I feel like is constantly unfolding for all of us. And so we all have these moments, and it doesn't matter what anatomy you have. It doesn't matter if you have a uterus, had a uterus, don't have one no more, you bleed, you don't bleed, never bled. It doesn't matter. What matters is that all of us have a creative force. We all have a creative center, just energetically, and we all have the power to create and to give birth and to give rise to things that are like spawning within us. And I believe that that's like a mandate for each of us to deliver on those things, because we were born to do them, right? And so, and when we don't, it's a huge loss for humanity, because each of us believes, like, maybe, you know, Kate is here and I'm here and Dawn is here and we're sitting up here, but everybody here has medicine on their hearts to heal other people. Everybody here has something they can offer other people, but that only you can do. And so sometimes you need somebody to, like, take you by the hand and say, okay, I know that if I stand with you, we'll get there. But only you know the way to go. So let's go. And sometimes that's all you need, right? And so I encourage everybody to, whatever journey you're on, to find who those people are that can help you to safe passage to the other side of whatever you're moving through in your lives. Because we're not meant to do it alone, just like you said. We're not meant to do anything alone. We evolved for interdependence. Quiet as it's kept. I know we have this whole, like, be independent theme, and the songs are all like that and whatever. It's like, no, we did not. If you were by yourself, you were gonna get eaten by a mammoth, okay? You were not supposed to be alone in nature. You're supposed to be with people and with community, but that's also, it soothes our nervous system to be in spaces where we're with other people like us. We feel safety. So you need to find the people who make you feel safe, and that can hold your hand as you give rise to these things that you're supposed to be giving rise to, giving birth to, bringing to the world, because it's so needed right now. And it's so necessary, because only you can do it in this precious time that you have, in this iteration, through this physical body, in this moment in time. It's really important. Yeah. Yeah. Just receiving a breath.
You know, it's such an incredible reframe around darkness and what's possible in darkness, and that's actually a completely necessary part of the creative process.
So necessary.
And I'm, like, struck by how much, kind of, as you say,
discourse around light and being in the light and like walking to the light and like lightness of being, but that also how much this darkness is needed in order to have growth and transformation take place. And so, in relationship, like when we are in that space of being underground for a moment, and we need someone to hold our hand, and the people around us who love us, because they love us, are having a difficult time being with us in that space. Like, what do we say? Like, what can we say to our loved ones from that place about how to hold our hand?
Yeah. So it's so interesting. I love that. Because like people want to help you, but they want to help you in the way they think they want to help you, not the way you want to be helped, right? Always.
Yeah.
And always people, like I have a mom who's, I hope she's not watching this. My mom is really strong-willed. She's an Aries too. Shout out to the Aries. I grew up in the Aries household. I'm a Taurus. I have a sister who's a Taurus. It was difficult. So I'm just saying, it's like the horns lock. It's a whole other thing. So I, my mom, for instance, gives a lot of advice that I didn't ask for, but what I find though is that I take the things that I need. It's like you eat the fish and throw away the bones, right? There's always something that could be helpful in it, even though it can be painful to hear certain things, even though it might come across criticism, but there's sometimes a nugget, under the love, right? And we always know when we're unsafe, right? Like, so if it's people who are just unsafe, it's like I just dismiss that, and I also remove myself from situations where I know I'm not going to feel safety. But in instances where I know people mean well, I'll listen, and then I'll also use my skills to create boundaries. And this is something that is a lifelong practice that we all have to, just get better and better at. And, because it's important for people to know like where they begin and where you end, right? And so sometimes that means like, no, you can't come to the birth, right? Or sometimes that might mean, you might not mention this project that's going on because you might have a family member who will tell everybody and post it to Facebook and you just haven't even started. Yeah. Or, like it's different. Like you figure out like who you can share what with.
Right.
And then I think, again, you enlist the people who can be really good arbiters for safety for you. So who are those people who are going to be, I'm totally fine if people are mad at me. If somebody wants to be like, okay, I don't want to tell my mother-in-law, but can you? I'm like, sure. Like, I'm going to totally disarm her and help her understand why it is that we need to create some space. And I'm going to give her activities to go do. And you know what I mean? And then we'll be hugging, at the events in the future. But I am totally fine with being the person who, has to give the news like that we're actually setting a boundary right here. And so I'm going to ask that you respect it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that with family, similarly, or people that love us, I think we have to also create some boundaries and then come up with a lexicon or some sort of language that helps them to understand where we are in process. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that could be something like even sitting people down and saying, hey, this is what's happening for me. This is what my life's going to look like in this period while I'm doing this. And I want to let you know if I don't call you back, if I don't text you right away, like whatever these things are, so that you can just let people know in advance. And then outside of that, if people are mad at you or whatever, you can't please everyone, right? And so I think that so much of our neuroses comes from really one piece I think is like wanting things for people that they don't want for themselves, mm-hmm. right? And so family members will put something on you and you're like, that's not what I desire, right? And so we don't have to own their tension around that, or it's like their job to mourn their loss for whatever they thought that was going to be, and right. It's your job to stay in the bubble of creativity and do your work, because you have a finite. It feels like you have a lot of time, right? You do when it's like infinite, right? But at the same time, we just don't know. Right? So if we feel called, if we feel compelled, and something says go write, or something says go dance, or something, whatever it is, like you need to let that energy move through you in that time. And really, a lot of cognitive energy is sucked up by worried about how people feel, and about you, and like you hurt their feel, like all these things, right? And you can get really sucked into that, right? And so what I would say is like finding some spaces that are safe and creating some healthy boundaries and ritual of how you enter into your space, right? Separation, even if you're in the same home, there's ways that you can create barriers for yourself so that you can feel like you can retreat, because retreat is so important for everyone. Like if we look at all spiritual texts, there's always references to retreat, to solace, to, you know, time away, to fasting, to all types of observances that allow for this opening of higher consciousness, but really for birth, right? It's like a pathway of opening and prying yourself to be vulnerable to a place even where you can receive from the divine, right? And so you can't be doing that if you're like worried about what your sister thinks about the Facebook post or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't be in that energy. So I think that we have to create spaces for ourselves in that way, and then also like, you know, just know that some family members or friends you have to like, you know, it's a dance. You got to learn how to like, you know, like the Matrix. You know, you got to figure it out. Right? Sometimes you got to do that. And I think that that's why it's really important to have people who can support, right? Because then you can say, okay, I'm gonna need your help on this, and you know, also I'm gonna need you, like if I'm out, if I know Kate's working on something, I'm like, and we're in a group of friends, and they're like, she hasn't called me back. I'm like, girl, she's working on her book, and you know, I can stand up for you as well. So I think we have these people who are also like, who protect us as well, right? Like who can also hold space around us and as they cheerlead for us too.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of you know, creating a birth plan for a project and being able to kind of map out, okay, what are the arcs and when do I know I'll actually need to retreat? And
what does that look like for you with your project right now?
Oh, me?
Yes. Oh, yes, you. Tables are turned. Okay.
Latham. Well, I just got back from a month-long silent retreat in South Africa. And that I hadn't done for several years, but because I teach meditation retreats, it's really important to, you know, dive in and deepen the well a bit. So that was incredible, and I know I just felt so blessed to be able to do something like that. Like I was in a really remote place, and there was no reading and no writing, and it was just like being in nature, which sounds really good until like the second day. And then you're like, oh. You know, it's just weird. Like you're out there, like you hear things. You're like, what? You know, I grew up in Chicago, so
girl,
I thought the environment.
You were like, what's that?
Well, it was like in the 80s, so it was this, you know, save the rainforest time. And one day I had to ask my mom. I was like, Mom, I hope we can go to the environment one day. She was like, what do you mean, babe? And I was like, you know, like the rainforest. And I didn't.
That is so cute.
The environment. But now, you know, connecting with nature is important. And yeah, when I lived here in the city, you know, going to the park for I guess what I'm saying is going on a long retreat like that is not always possible. It's probably not going to be possible for me, you know, much longer. And so I guess, where do I go? I go to nature. I go to the water. I change the subject sometimes. Like I watch a silly movie, or I guess with writing, it was both learning that for me as a writer, reading other people's words, like reading inspiring authors who I love and who I see as like the, you know, hopefully someday, you know, aunties and cousins of my book, is totally inspiring. And it doesn't mean that I start writing like them or something like that. It's
They're like your literary ancestors.
Yeah. They're my literary family tree. So I'll go to Alice Walker, and I'll go to Bell Hooks, and I'll go to Sandra Cisneros, and I'll go to Isabel Allende. And then I think another thing that was beautiful that I learned in the writing process is that when I get stuck, my cousin actually started doing this with me. She would ask me to tell her about where I was stuck and what I was thinking, and she would record our conversation. And then she would send it back to me. A couple times she sent it back to me transcribed, which is incredible.
Have mercy. Thank you.
But it was like, it was in there, but the pace at which I write was different, the pace at which I think and which I speak. And so just having her talk it through with me was brilliant.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I do have those doulas in my life. I want to get some audience questions, but before we do, I have one last one, which is about, it's kind of an experience I had recently. I'm in, the potentially childbearing years of my life, and I was visiting my midwife just for a checkup. That's why I go to have my annual physical, and she was asking about whether parenting was in the works for me and whether I wanted to be a biological parent, and I was kind of hesitant, like, oh yeah, maybe, but maybe waiting a little while longer. Yeah, I think maybe waiting a little while longer. And she just looked at me and she said, it's a little scary, huh? Like all of the information that's coming out about Black mothers and mortality rate. And I just burst into tears and had no idea how much that that news had been impacting me and my potential decision around becoming a biological parent or trying to. And so I really appreciate the way that you've been, for a lot longer than I've seen it in the news, making this issue visible and helping make spaces as safe as possible for Black mothers. And I guess in light of this conversation around power, have been really thinking about, the role of a doula in helping negotiate power and social inequality within the birthing industry. Has that become a part of your work and the part of the work that people are becoming doulas to do?
First of all, thank you for sharing that, because it's a heartbreaking story. It's heartbreaking to hear. It's happening every day, right? I see so many women, because now, like social media, for instance, right, is flooded with a lot of the stories. You'll see more around the statistics. And just to share for anyone who's unaware, the CDC put out a report a few years ago. There's a 25-year increase where we've been seeing this incline in maternal deaths in the United States. And there's about 700 women per year that died during childbirth or due to childbirth-related causes. And the stats are really, they range, right? But for Black women in the United States in general, they're 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth or due to childbirth-related causes than white women. So for every 100,000 live births, there's 43 deaths, right? For white women, it's like 12, for other women, it's like 14, right? So what that looks like is when that plays out in the media, it's really scary. It looks like we're all dying, which is not the case. But what is happening and what is the case is that there are a lot of biases because the medical system is rooted in supremacy. I mean, when the first granny midwives came to the United States in the 1600s, they brought medicine with them from West Africa. They brought all these incredible healing traditions, as well as the ability to understand the dynamics of the pelvis and help women birth. And so they not only delivered babies in the Middle Passage in darkness on slave ships, nursed each other's babies while shackled. They brought medicine in their hair and through scarves. And when they got onto US soil, because they knew they were leaving their homelands, they brought with them sorghums and rices and things from home, and also herbs, in seed. And that was, also brought here into the South. And so a lot of the foods and medicines that our ancestors had at home, they brought here for the next generation, right? And not only did they deliver each other's babies, but also the babies of the slave masters. And they looked after the mistresses, and they looked after the masters as well if there were no doctors available. So they were they were a highly valuable resource. And they were the only ones delivering babies at first. It was actually seen globally as completely crude for men to enter into a room where women were attending a birth. In the 1700s, men decided it was a good idea to disrupt a process that was working super well without them. And decided like we could do a really great job of, like whatever they're doing. And so they brought the midwives in, they studied their practices, they co-opted their work, they were not credited. Alongside that, there were slave hospitals where black bodies, as well as Irish women who were working in indentured servitude, their bodies were experimented upon without anesthesia for the to really address pathologies in white women so that they could be healthy, right? And then there was also this other side of like wanting to keep the slaves healthy because they were a commodity, and if a slave mother could not, she could not bear fruit, right? She couldn't bear children, then she was less valuable. So they really wanted to like, during chattel slavery, that was like the commodity. So we know that like in that system, once it became that insurance would take slaves could be insured to go and get treatment from white doctors, then they became like an attractive client, right? And so then our system started to break down where the midwives are no longer attending in the same way, and then this propaganda started, which is still very alive today. People think that midwives show up to your birth with like some hot towels. Like they don't really understand. They don't understand. Like it's like, oh, what does she really do? They think midwives and doulas are the same, and like it's this hippie thing only, and it's really just like, so this propaganda has worked so well, really, right? To really dismantle the power of this legacy, right? And so I say that to just give a framework of a context that was like completely like a racist foundation, right? And so you have women who enter into a system for care, and many who are completely healthy who do not walk out alive, or who go home and then they suffer, whether, I don't want to get into like what types of suffering, but there's many challenges. And sometimes there are real health issues that come up that are not seen because there's not a lot of time the doctors will spend with their clients, and then they might not diagnose things. And so that's why it's really, really important, as we see it, to have doulas who can, spend time with you and be like, this is interesting. You have a lot of swelling. Maybe you should go to the doctor, and let's see, we can, pre-screen for a lot of things, by like communicating with the doctors. And so a lot of these things aren't addressed because, there's a lot of biases. And so I think what's important for women of all backgrounds, but especially for women of color who are entering these spaces and already feeling like they don't belong, or already feeling like they're not going to be heard, is to understand how to advocate for themselves, right? Like all of us should. Even if you're going to the dentist, it's like, before you touch my mouth, let's talk about like what's going to happen. And so understanding what consent looks like. We have a really powerful framework for consent in terms of a discourse right now, right, about sexual assault and really looking at like transgressions, but if we can think about all the pregnant survivors, right, of abuse and of trauma. We actually have a really wonderful workshop coming up on June 2nd for doulas on trauma-informed doula support. You can come just if you're someone who wants to support people who've experienced trauma, or if you've experienced it yourself. But entering into a system where you may be re-traumatized, or that you might leave feeling trauma, right, or having experienced a trauma or a wound, it's so important for us to be able to advocate. And so this consent piece is really important, right? And understanding what consent looks like. We have a really great article on Mama Glow, so I don't want to have to break it down for you now necessarily, but that's really important. It's the #1 key tool for all of us to be able to protect ourselves and to understand what the patient's Bill of Rights looks like, understanding what this particular hospital's rules are as it relates to all the things that are happening on your perceived birth plan or birth preferences, right? And then having people who can come with you and attend and support you, but also I think working with practitioners who share similar views and have a similar outlook in life and how they look at the body and how they view the female body. Because if you're going into a place where they feel like it's an accident waiting to happen, where they feel like the female body is like, you know, I mean, really pathology, right? Mm-hmm. Like they think that like the standard is male and then female, there's something wrong, right? This is what a lot of women experience, and this is how the system is created. They used to not even study our bodies because it was only, the friars could only open up male cadavers because women ate the fruit and whatever, and like Eve like got it so that we were banished, and you know what I mean? Women ate the fruit, so you couldn't, you know, ate the apple, whatever, right? Like that's why we could never, that's why they would never look at our bodies because they were tarnished. And so they studied the male body. That's why they know so much about men's bodies. That's why they figured out how to get rid of prostate cancer. You can walk home after that surgery, right? But they're still trying to figure out breast cancer. They're still trying to figure out ovarian. We don't know what to do about cervical cancer. It's like, so if we don't learn how to advocate for ourselves, take care of ourselves first, really, like know and learn our bodies, right? These people are not gonna be able to tell us. And so it's really important, I think, first, that we create circles like this of education and practitioners, and we like really have our supports in place so that when you do go in, you feel confident, like you know that the people who are there to support you really care. They're really gonna make sure that you, not only that you survive, but that you thrive, and that you have practices and tools to navigate the anxiety, especially now we're in the Mother's Day month, right? But we're also in Maternal Mental Health Month, and we're actually today, this is World Maternal Mental Health Day, and so, yes.
Wow.
So this is like, you know, we think about anxiety and, you know, PTSD and all the things that come up for women who've been traumatized through the birth process or anywhere around that, or women who aren't even having their children yet but feel traumatized by this information, right? This is a time for us to look at practices, tools, practitioners, people, safe spaces, right? Where we can like unload and unpack and you know, look at the dysfunction of the system, but also look at like what's going right, like your midwife, that you have a well woman care provider who you know has got your back. You know you're safe there.
Heather's awesome.
Right? So, so you know, like also affirming ourselves and making sure that we not only look at the stories that are, you know, that are challenging and really scary, but that we, you know, if you know that that gives you anxiety, shut that off and watch like things that are positive and listen to stories that are like triumphant as well. Like it's important to know the information, but at a certain point there is a such thing as knowing too much. And I think that can get your mind racing, right? And instead, like we know the information, now what are we gonna do about it? Right? As practitioners, as people, what are we gonna do to create change? What are we gonna do to address the policy gaps, right? And we can do this as individuals, but as a collective. And so everyone has to look at this as a broad-based movement for all of us, because every one of us came out of, you know, a woman. So it's everybody's issue. It's not, and there's a lot of men in here, thank you for being here, right? There's a lot of men in here, but all of us, this is an issue for all of us. It's not a feminist issue, it's a human rights issue, right? And so for Black women to be dying and for that not to be at the top of the news feed, like on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on the news, right? It shows where our priorities are, right? So, so in the spaces where we can affect change, I think it's really important to hold people's hands, you know, along the journey, to support people, but also to have the folks around you that you know are going to help you with tools that empower you, right? Not just information that scares you, right? Because it's not about scaring, it's about creating awareness so that we can then tackle something, so that we can tear down and dismantle something and now build the future. And what does the future of health look like? Like, what do we envision that to be? We can create that together, right? But it just takes all of us, because if there's a little group of people that's saying, hey, look at us, we're over here dying, hey, we need your help, and then nobody, funnels any energy there, it can't be done alone, right? So we all need to, and at this stage, it's a powerful place for you to be, because you can learn so much along the way. And so that when you're ready, you feel really confident,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's heartbreaking, all this information, but know that this is not just happening now, this has been happening. It's just that there's an awareness now.
Yeah.
And so instead of us getting stifled in that awareness, I would encourage us to actually get riled up and use that energy to fuel change, to do something, and whatever that means for you. It doesn't mean that you're gonna march. You might instead, you might be an artist, you might create some art around it, or you might work for an organization. There's a lot of things that we can do.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I learned so much today, and I got to ask all the questions so far.
Yay.
Feeling a little just grateful, actually.
I'm grateful.
Yeah, I'd love to open it up and to hear if anybody else has anything they want to ask about.
Or just talk, or tell us what's going on in your life.
Let's open it up. And while you're thinking of your questions, I just wanted to say, Latham, I think your Instagram accounts are really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Positive influences, and I imagine could give some, and do give some, just inspiration in the face of news like that. So
Thank you so
thank you for
much.
that work. It's really exciting to see just so many real different positive images of powerful women and moms and babies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
Yeah, so raise your hand if you have a question. We'll bring a mic to you, and we'd love to hear from you. Yeah, right here.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle. Thank you for everything that you said today. It's very inspiring. Had a question for you, Latham, but what, if there was one, was the event that really planted the seed of awareness for you to become a doula and really kind of create the movement that you've created?
Thank you for that, Gabrielle. I love the mustard. So, you know what it was for me? I was resisting the calling. I'm a Taurus. We put our hooves in the ground, right? This is no, I'm not going, right? So I was resistant, actually. I was feeling it for years. People were like, oh, I wish you would be my doula. I was like, nope. And I just wasn't, it was, you know how something hovers around for a while and you're like, I'm aware of this energy. You're too close, right? It was just this, it was coding me. I felt like it was gonna happen, but I just wasn't ready. And so I remember I was at an ashram and I was teaching, and it was gonna be my birthday. And so they organized this puja ceremony, and then there was this beautiful Vedic astrologer, and he was like, I'm gonna do your reading. It's a traditional reading that we do on the third day after your birthday. And I was like, perfect. So I went into this little cave kind of with him, I guess. It sounds really weird now, but in thinking about it, but yes, I went into this little, and go in. And then he did, but what he did was so beautiful. There was this, he created, there was this sort of divination setup, and it was if anyone knows about Yoruba and Ifa, it was the same things. There was cowrie shells, there was all these natural elements. And so he starts throwing the shells and then speaking and then writing some stuff. And so then after all of this, right, I'm just sitting here okay, what is he gonna say? And he says, you're supposed to mother the mother. I was like, okay. I said, well, I'm kind of doing that already. He's like, no, you're supposed to really. I was like, okay. And so he gave me a list of, he gave me a bunch of numbers, which I wrote down. And you know how, like, if somebody tells you, like my grandfather, he plays the numbers, or I don't know, it's the lottery or whatever. He's like, what was your flight number? What's your house number? What was the bus number you were on? Like, every number is something, right? So I was like, Grandpa, I was like, oh, wait, what's my flight number? Is it, I was like looking for all of the numbers for a second, and then that, I forgot. And so then I got settled home and in my life, and this is back when people didn't check their email every day, by the way. Like, I didn't think email was gonna stay, right? Like, I had to have somebody teach me how to whatever. So anyway, I went on it, my once a week, ritual of checking it or whatever at the time. And I don't remember applying, but apparently I applied for this doula fellowship. And so
Wow.
I don't even remember doing it. I think like spirit just, like, I don't remember doing it, like consciously remember. And so I remember seeing this thing, the ping or whatever for the email, whatever it was back then. And so I look and I see the date, and it says something, you've been accepted to this doula fellowship. And then I look at the date, and it corresponded with what he said when I saw him, one of the numbers.
Whoa.
I was like, okay. I said, got it, done, right? Like, so I just accepted at that point, but it was very resistant in the beginning, and then just like it opened. It was like, it was a surrender. It was like a final surrender. Like, okay, I'm here, just order my steps. And so I just let spirit just guide the way, and I just get out the way, and I just let it happen. And so I think that was one. And then the other experience was the birth of my son. And that was also really powerful here on 14th Street. It used to be Elizabeth Seton's. Do you remember that, Dawn? Elizabeth Seton Childbearing Center, anybody? Okay, so it was the only freestanding birth center in New York, right? Wow. Where you could go in, it was all midwives. And there was these rooms set up like your bedroom. And there was hot tubs with jets, which I did most of my birthing in, right? But at one point in the birth, I had gotten out of the tub, and it was time to deliver my son. And he had this, his cord was wrapped around his shoulder, kind of like a backpack strap. And so he was getting compressed on his descent. And so they're like, we'd love for you to, get out of the tub and like, come deliver your baby now. I was like, okay. So with calm, it wasn't like crazy, like it would have possibly been if I was in a different setting. So at that point, I'm sort of like in this squatting position, but I'm on like the bed, and I feel this heat, like in the shape of a U, like around me, like up above me. Like, how you're in the subway or something, and you feel somebody staring at you, and you're like, I'm about to ignite, who's looking at me, right? You just feel this like energy, and you're like, who is looking at me that hard? It felt like that. They were looking at me so intently, and then I look up, and I see in the shape of a U like this, like these ancestors. And I didn't recognize them like by face, but there was like a soul recognition. Like I knew these were my people. And this is before Black Panther, they were like this.
Yes! Wakanda forever.
They were like this looking down. And I did like this, I said, I wanna go there. Everybody remembers it, my midwife, the father, everybody remembers it. I was like, I wanna go there. And I felt myself ascend. I felt like this, and this is part of like a primal birth process that's like this ascendant experience is available to all of us. People travel the world and do sacred ceremony with peyote and ayahuasca to experience the same free-flowing DMT that you can experience at peak levels of life, orgasm, meditation, birth, and death. And I was experiencing it through the portal of birth. And I saw what I might have saw if I was like in Peru with a shaman, but I saw it there. And so I knew, I was like, oh, people didn't say this. They said a lot of things about birth, but they did not say this.
Wow.
And so I was like, I have to protect this for people, and whatever that means, because this was totally different than what people said to me. And I couldn't really tell that story a lot to people because they were like, what, in the beginning? But I've come to know through science and understanding the mechanics of the body and the brain and the spiritual body, how there's this dance, this cosmic dance that's happening through us. And that's what allows for that ascension. And so to me, that was the most powerful experience of my life that also led me to on that path, which I resisted, but then I accepted finally.
Yeah, and seemed to be all in.
And I was all in after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, thank you, Gabby, for that.
Any other questions out there?
They know everything about birth. They're good.
Yeah, we have a mic for you right here.
Many respect for your many contributions to a very important thing.
Thank you.
Do you speak to what, I think in this context the conversation has been mostly like female body, male body, but any body that's not identified as female body, do you have some general recommendations or words of wisdom for how they contribute and participate in the process?
Can you clarify like how they contribute to?
Yeah, you know, because you talked about one of the things you support is like partners, right?
Yes.
And how they can play a role, but as I think about this thing that you've established as a very like sacred process that has been guided and developed by the female body for forever. I'm just curious about whether you like have people who ask you questions like this, like, hey, you know, what's the role and what's the relationship, right, that the non-female body plays in this process?
Okay, so the partner's role, is
Yeah,
that?
that feels good.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think that what's really important for me, I did not have the partner that like participated. And so I'm really sensitive for birthing people, like what that configuration looks like for them, like in making sure that they do feel the support and that they do have the that we get the partner to the place that they need to be so that they can mirror that. Because one of the really powerful things that partners can do is they create safety for the birthing mother to imprint onto. So what that looks like is, if we think about, have you ever seen these cute little videos where it's like the duck was born or the mom wasn't there and then she attaches to like a dog and it's like, you know, then she starts, right? So this happens, right? This imprinting happens with humans too, where the primary figure, so what happens like in birth early on, because there's such a transference of hormones, like I don't go right away. I let the couple imprint. And then when I come, then I enter into something that's already in play. So I don't disrupt a primal process where I don't want the mother to attach to me, I want her to attach to the partner, right? So, so that's through scent, that's through touch, that's through intention, that's through sound. You know, a lot of, you know, singing, or even like I have couples to do like affirmations together of their own, not like saying things that they read somewhere, but really making things mean something for them as a couple. Also, like looking at the ancestral traditions that you come from, what that looks like for each person, and bringing in some of those tools and some rituals, ceremony, sacred practices. I ask couples also to like, you know, ask about the traditions in your family, like how were you born? If there's people who can tell you about that, were you breastfed? What was your birth like? You know, and then also for, like I like to do peer to peer sometimes, so I'll have, where there's a father sometimes or a partner, and they might not be like as, you know, maybe they're just sort of like figuring it out, like I'll have someone who kind of like found their way also talk to them too, so they can relate, like, you know, I was here with it and now I'm like on this side of it, here's what I learned, here's, you know, so that they can also hear it not from me, but also from someone who also went through it. And then I, you know, but when as it relates to like their role, I think it's defined by each couple. I've been in spaces where like a mom will say, you know, I don't want the partner like looking at anything below like my breast level, like just make sure he's over here and whatever, and you stay down here. I'm like, okay, cool. And I'm like, but like people are gonna see, people need to see, right? The magic. And so, and people want to usually see their baby be born. But I'll have instances too where it'll be, there's cultural things. So for instance, I had a couple where there was a mother who was Buddhist actually, and the father was Muslim. And so one of the things that I would ask is, you know, is there anything in your spiritual practice that I should know about? right? Or is there anything that might be important to you that I can help you achieve in this space that we're sharing together? And then we were able to bring in, like, he was like, well, it would be important, or I would really appreciate if we could face east in the room. Like, could we get a window? And I was like, yeah, let's figure that out. You know, I need to have a space where I can pray. Cool. The mom was like, I want to bring an orange tree. I want to do this. I want to have pictures. And it was like, they like came in with like, it was like they moved in. I had like stuff, and I was like, I don't feel safe like even leaving this room by itself. But it was beautiful because he felt like he could really show up as himself, and he really felt comfortable because I made sure that we created that space so that he could feel comfortable. And then he was able to show up for her because he didn't feel like he was in a foreign space. He was also an immigrant too. So for him, he was already feeling like, I don't speak the language, I have an accent, people probably don't think I'm as educated when I'm speaking to the doctors. And so in that little room, we created a space where then he felt more confident when he was communicating because he also felt like he was in a safe space. So I think it's just really important to even as we explore this, maybe work with someone too who can help you to kind of navigate where some of your questions are, your concerns, your fears, but also some of your desires of what you want to bring into the space so that you can feel safe. But outside of that, it's just learning like techniques and tools, and those are things that like everybody can learn. And I find that fathers tend to be stronger than me, so I teach them all the things that like I tire fast of, so that they could do those things. And I find also that, you know, depending on how people enter into the process, whether they're same sex or gender nonconforming, there's always different ways that we approach their needs based on like where we're gonna be at, if it's a home setting, hospital, birth center, right? So it really depends, but I think having these conversations early and then finding a trusted doula that you can trust, and also a community of people who are also going through it, then you can also learn along the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we close tonight, I know we want to end in a practice. And,
Yes.
And as you have both been speaking, I've also just been thinking about the tool of breath and focus on the breath and how significant that is in both of your worlds. And so I think we're going to bring that into the room here tonight. And before we do that, I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming, and to encourage you to come back. We have the whole series that is dedicated to this work and these amazing conversations. And in 2 weeks, we'll talk about the healing power of telling your story. And this is with storytellers Jamia Wilson and Lisa Weinert. So lots of other fabulous things coming, and please come back.
Yeah.
And Kate and Latham, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to hand it over to you so we can end in an action of practice. Thank you.
I think is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know, she's so fancy over here.
Oh, well, I was, on retreat for a month, so I was wearing gray sweatpants. I've had it's so much fun to put on accessories again,
Yeah.
all the things.
And you know what? I'm just going to join in for one more second just to say that, to remind you all that please join us upstairs. Latham will be signing books.
Right.
Yeah, so
And
please come, and we'll see you up there.
Yeah, I especially appreciate in your book like how accessible you make a lot of these like retreat practices that you talked about. Ways that we can actually care for ourselves in ways that aren't necessarily expensive, don't take a lot of time, but have a huge impact. And so thank you for that, for those like that information about kind of birthing ourselves, birthing our own creativity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so just to settle before we end, yeah, if you wouldn't mind just closing your eyes or softening your gaze and tuning into your meditative mood just for a minute or two. And kind of bathing in the felt sense of what we've heard and experienced together. Dropping into the feeling of your own breath at this moment, feeling the sensations that come when you breathe in and when you breathe out, and letting that be, if it can be, a soothing feeling, a nourishing and nurturing feeling. And as you settle into the breath, just a moment to drop in the question and see what pops up. What is wanting to be birthed through me right now? And giving it some time. And then, if and when something arrives, just asking yourself, and who can hold my hand in this? Who can be with me as I go along this process of bringing something into being that wasn't there before? And that's our meditation bell. Open your eyes. Thank you for that divine timing. That worked out really well. So thank you everyone for coming so much. It was such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you. You're amazing. I learned so much. It was so useful. And yeah, please join us upstairs for a little bit of conversation and for book signing with Latham.
Oh my gosh, thank you.